we start with Frank. We always start with a different person. And then Diana, and then Anna, you finish. Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. It's past 15, so let's start now with 15 minutes delay. So I'm sorry for this little delay. So thank you very much for coming. Today we are trying a different setup for the discussion. Today we're not going to have a plenary, a keynote, but we are going to have a panel debate. The idea here is to discuss a very urgent and very important topic, which is what we have now about uncertainty. We heard yesterday that uncertainty is the mark of the day. So we are going to discuss what types of uncertainty we are facing, what does it mean, and what type of strategies we could have for sustainability. So the context is not difficult to explain to you. I'm sure everyone are aware of the challenges that sustainability faces today. Just noting a couple of them: intensifying crisis, multiple type of crisis, climate setbacks, global political fragmentation. And in this context, how can sustainability transitions can remain both resilient, equitable, and forward-looking? For that, we have a very high-level panel of personalities that, in one way or the other, they are implementing sustainability in their careers, in their work. So let me introduce Professor Ana Fontoura Gouveia, current head of sustainability for the Bank of Portugal and also vice president of the Bank of Portugal. So thank you for coming. We are, I'm not doing any type of protocol here. I'm just following the sequence. We are also very proud of receiving Diana Forsats, vice president of the IPCC. So welcome for coming. And probably the person you don't know from this panel is Professor Frank Giels from the University of Manchester. Thank you for coming. Okay, without further delay, let's start. We are going to have, by the way, 3 rounds of questions, short questions. The first question would be to Diana. And I can raise the question right from here. So this question actually will be shared among the 3 of you, and we will have 3 questions, as I said. So the first one is, what has fundamentally shifted in the last year for sustainability?
Thank you very much, Nuno. So first of all, it's really a privilege to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here. Instead of, I should be in Bonn in the climate negotiations, but I think we can forward sustainability hopefully much more here than what it's sometimes difficult. So yes, sustainability and sustainability transitions are definitely challenged in the last year. On the other hand, what hasn't been challenged? But let me just identify a couple of the trends that I'm and scientists are most concerned about. But I promise that we discussed before the panel that we won't be all doom always. So, but this, I guess, there are a couple of negative things, and I'm not even getting into the geopolitical issues. But first, I think what is perhaps among the most concerning is the changing the role of science in general, and the change in the trust in science. and how the world is changing, just how people are obtaining their knowledge and information, that diminishes the role of science. So the increasing importance of fake news, disinformation, misinformation, and in general, just the less use of fact-checked news sources, but rather getting your information from social media bubbles that definitely influences the influence science itself can play. Another important issue is that that I think it is perhaps, maybe this is good, and that we will get into that discussion later. But I think it is really a time when we wake up and see, well, maybe sustainability is not necessarily the top priority for everyone on the planet. And I think maybe that's a revelation that perhaps it's good actually to have. Because if you talk to just average people, then you understand that it would be a lie to ourselves to think that the time will ever come when sustainability will be the key goal of every person on the planet. And I think that recognition will actually help us in organizing our work and structuring our work. So rather than just, hoping that, yeah, we just have more science and we can just prove more and there's more bigger threats and more urgency, and then everybody will prioritize sustainability on the top. No, I think it's good to recognize that will never happen, but we still need to advance these transitions in the context of this not being the first priority at all. Another related issue is that I think we have been hoping that, yes, as soon as the climate impacts will be really visible and really possible to feel, that will finally show people the urgency, and that finally transform, that we put much more emphasis on action against this. I think last years were really revolutionary or revealing that we need to understand that it also will never come. Just look at, for example, the fires in Los Angeles, right before after the change in the political system. Still, that had almost absolutely no influence on being climate change a priority. And we can say many other impacts that even if there are really major crises related to the environment, it doesn't really seem to fundamentally necessarily shift political priorities in this direction. But again, we just have to then accommodate it. Then, of course, another point is the artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to talk more about this, but that just the uncertainty that on one hand, we have these unbelievable opportunities that finally we may be able to have all the knowledge how to optimize systems to be perfectly efficient, how to really solve our problems. But on the other hand, maybe that's not what AI will lead us to. Maybe it is also going to actually eat so much of our energy and resources that perhaps, so just this, we are really at the crossroads, which way artificial intelligence will bring us in the context of sustainability transitions. And I'm sure, I know you are talking about this in this conference, I don't want to get to that. But just two more very quick things. So first of all, I think the issue of the erosion of global ethics, or in general, just the values and global solidarity, and just the recognition that we are societies responsible for others, and it's not only me and now, and that has been really shifting. That has been, over many decades, this has become a major United Nations value that those who are rich need to care for those who are poor, and also just we are working along certain values, and that just the questioning of these, I think, make it very difficult for the sustainability transitions, which is about other values than just me and now and just strictly economics. I think I'll stop there now and come back to these points later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Hannah, in terms from a macroeconomic and also institutional perspective, how environmental policies have changed in these few years, in your perspective?
Let me start by thanking you for being here. It's a pleasure to join you this morning. Congratulations for the organization of the conference. It's an honor to share this panel with my fellow panelists. I would like to start maybe with what hasn't changed. And what hasn't changed is the underlying reality, you know, climate science, climate risks, that hasn't changed. And the fact that we do know that extreme climate events, extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more intense is a reality. And we are here in the academia, so there's no way to ignore these facts. This doesn't change by political decision, or this doesn't change by good intentions, let's say. And this is not a reality for the future, because more often than not, when we talk about climate change and its effects, we tend to think about something that will happen in the future, something that will compromise future generations. But Carbon Brief, for instance, looks at what the science tells us about past extreme weather events. So they look at droughts, they look at floods that already happened globally. So they look at studies on those climate events. And from something like 750 extreme climate events that already happened, they show that 550 were more intense or more probable because of climate change. So this is not something that we should worry only for future generations, but also for our generation, for us, actually. And this is a reality that impacts all countries. So, of course, we are particularly worried by what happens in Portugal. I can give you a figure, it's just an illustration, but currently the average of days per year with extreme weather that can cause wildfires is around 15 days currently. In the coming decade, and in the coming decade is actually in 5 years, this number can more than double. So we'll have 30, 45 days where we have a severe risk of wildfires. So this hasn't changed. In Bank of Portugal, so we are doing our part, we are the regulator of financial institutions, and we are incorporating sustainability into what we do, like each and everyone must do. And we did an analysis 2 years ago where we look at different climate scenarios. So as you know, climate scenarios are not predictions, they are possible paths depending on different policy decisions. And what our analysis shows for the banking sector, but also for the economy as a whole, is that there are clear benefits of acting now upon climate change. So the benefits are clearly there. There are short-term costs, and it is for policymakers, and in particular for for politicians to address them, but they are there. So the reality hasn't changed. We know that we must act upon that reality, but as Diane just said, we also know there are different levels of commitment, let's say. There are different responses from different policy actors. And so what is our individual duty of those that understand these effects and that want to act upon it is that the sense of urgency is only reinforced. And this is, I would say, what has changed, is that now each individual action is even more important to counter these effects that will actually impact each and every country of the world. And just to end this initial intervention, for instance, in Portugal, of course, we are worried about the increased intensity and frequency of extreme climate events in Portugal, but we are not only directly affected by those, right? If there is an extreme a climate event, for instance, in Brazil, where we import our fruit from, or if Panama Channel is not operational for a certain period, we are also affected. So this is really a global problem with very local consequences that basically implies that each and every one of us needs to integrate this into what we do. That's what central banks are now doing, and I can elaborate that, more on that in another intervention.
Very much, Anna. Very refreshing perspective, also from the institutions and what we hear nowadays. Yesterday, just a side note, I have this joke. We are coming from the Green New Deal to the Great Deal. But sorry for the joke, but that also reveals what we are experiencing nowadays.
Yeah.
Thank you for your perspective. Frank, what this moment reveals about the fitness of the governance for the deep transition?
Well, thanks for inviting me on this panel, Nuno, and I'm very glad to share the panel with Diana and Anna. Well, let me first say I liked your introduction. Of course, we all know there are sort of setbacks in targets and commitments and statements by companies about how committed they are. So this is worrying. This is leading to some delay, but I would say it is not going to derail the transition. Because there is also ongoing investment and growth in other areas. So I think it's a difficult situation. There are it's in a way 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I would say these sort of pushbacks and setbacks are normal in transitions. You know, transitions are 30, 40, 50-year processes, and it's not just a linear, great path to a fantastic future. There will always be setbacks. So I just want to create sort of this wider context that we should not despair. You know, sometimes at the conference I've heard, you know, we failed, you know, this is all doom and gloom, and what's happening, this is the end of the world kind of feeling. And I think it is, you know, clearly there are problems, but I would just like to say, you know, it's not the end of the world yet. And I think that the transition will keep going. So that's sort of my first. And this is in a way also that we are now in the real transition phase where the vested interests are being affected. It's no longer small niches. This is now really upscaling. And of course, that creates turmoil. I mean, I saw a presentation by Dirk Loorbach yesterday. Yeah, this is the normal, what you would expect when the transition is actually scaling up and beginning to happen. So in a way, this is normal, and we should not be overly concerned by that. The second point is, well, clearly the elephant in the room is sort of the rise in populism, in my feeling, and the green backlash associated with that. I would, however, say there's a whole sociological and political science literature, you know, for the last more than 10 years, which has tried to understand the origins sort of populism. And it's not just due to bad actors, you know, and the right wing. The right wing are mobilizing the frustration that is there on large parts of the population, but we need to understand where does this frustration come from, and not only what are the bad actors, the populists doing to exploit this. Now, much of this sociological and political science literature talks about sort of, partly this is a failure of left-wing politicians and left-wing intellectuals who have sort of disregarded a large part of the population, which in some estimates is 30 to 40% of the population. Intellectuals used to sort of identify with the working class, you know, up to the sort of 70s. Then you get the new social movements coming up, and intellectuals start identifying with all these new issues, identity politics and the new social movements. And the sort of the working class sort of, yeah, is not interesting anymore. And the same with politicians. Many of them, very few of them nowadays come actually from working class backgrounds. They also have been special advisors, they've gone to universities. They don't really understand anymore what's happening with working classes. So there's a deep frustration, I think, with large part of the population. Not only, so there's of course the economic reasons, you know, the cost of living crisis, just about managing is a term, you know, but they just can manage. But if the fridge breaks down, well, they don't have the £500 to replace it. So there are economic concerns that their wages, incomes have been stagnating for the last 10, 15 years. So there's definitely economic problems, but there's also cultural reasons. You know, whenever we and left-wing politicians talk about these people, we talk about what Hillary Clinton, they're the deplorables. You know, they are the left-behind people, they are the bigoted people, they're a bit uneducated, you know, they don't really understand about climate change, but, you know, wait until they wake up because of the disasters. We just need to educate them. So, yeah, we don't really, so they feel misunderstood. They feel frowned upon by politicians. They're the bigoted people. They feel despised in a way, misunderstood. And I think that's sort of feeding the anger and the frustration which led to Brexit, which led to Trump. It doesn't mean that all these people are right-wing, fascists, you know, and are really bad, but this is a real deep frustration. I think the left wing is struggling with it. I think we as a community also have not really done much about it. Whenever we look at society, we tend to look at NGOs and the community energy, you know, the positive, the progressives. So we do talk about participation and deliberation, but rarely with sort of the 30–40% of the people who, as Diane said, they don't really care about climate change. They care about a lot of other things. We think they're a bit backwards, you know, and I think that's a problem. So, well, it's understandable maybe we've not looked at that very much because it was not such a big issue maybe until now. But I think this is a challenge for us as a community to more seriously engage, and I know there are some people that have been doing that. It's a new challenge I think we need to incorporate in our frameworks, and there is a lot of sociological political science research on this issue. It's not easy, it will require some changes in our frameworks, but I think we need to address that more head on and not say populism is bad. You know, in a way, populism is a healthy antidote to their neglect, and you know, it's in a way, it means the people. Yeah, the anger and frustration is now being exploited, and that's got really negative potential outcomes, but I think we need to address that more head on. Sorry, and one last quick point, what has really changed also is, of course, the rise of China. You know, and this is a really big fundamental. They are leading both in deployment, in range of renewable, but also the manufacturing. And it goes really fast. It's got beneficial effects as well. They make these things really cheap now. We can benefit from that. But my fear is also they are just so much better, their technologies. And okay, we've had problems now with farmers who are struggling. But you know, the car industry in Europe, which accounts for 6% of jobs, direct or indirect, is under real threat, of course, from these cheap and better electric vehicles from China. We've already lost the solar industry, the wind industry. Steel is struggling, chemicals, because Europe is not very good in the AI and the new industries. We still are very strong in the traditional industries, but in pretty much all of them, we face a massive threat from China. And if you talk about job losses, if we lose half of the car industry, that will create real turmoil and upset. So I think it's the rise of China, again, at the international perspective, I think. I also have done loads of single country case studies, but I think we now need to really better address the international dimension and how to deal with the rise of China, which has positive effects, but also has got some real, serious threats for our economic vitality and therefore jobs, the social security, all these kind of issues. So I think that's a big thing that has changed, I think, in the last couple of years.
Now let's move to the round 2 of questions. So despite resistance, what type of opportunities does this crisis moment So what type of opportunities this resistance moment actually is giving for sustainability? I would start with Anna.
Yes, thank you. Well, there are plenty of opportunities, and markets are actually acknowledging this very clearly. The International Energy Agency publishes annually a report on energy investment, and the last edition is just out a couple of weeks or so. And what it shows is that investment in clean energy is around 2/3 of total investment in energy. So that means that fossil fuel investments are around only 1/3, and this has been declining. So this is ongoing, the transition is ongoing. The investments, the market investments are also being channeled to these industries, and it is because the business case is already there in a lot of technology. So the data from that report is very telling because it shows a clear and accelerated trend vis-a-vis clean energies. We do know that much more needs to be done. There are all these reports on what is the incremental investment, so the additional investment that we still need to do compared to what we are doing if we want to achieve our climate goals. And here in Europe, the European Central Bank recently, or well, a couple of months published a paper on that, and they say that we would have to invest in the European Union to reach our climate goals, something like more 3.7% of our GDP annually to reach our climate goals. So this is a huge boost for sure. And we also know that some of the technologies that we need to achieve that are not yet in place, are not yet mature. So I see some students around. It's also your task to find them, to develop them, and to make sure that we can make this happen. But so the opportunity is there. If we need this investment, it's also a huge investment, a huge industrial opportunity. And I would say that this is one of the advantages of the current disruption that we are living around the world is that, for instance, it pushed a bloc like the European Union to also think about an industrial policy. And let me be very clear on that. We cannot have a sustainability policy, a sustained climate policy, if it's not coupled with an industrial policy, because then we have the backlashes that we were just discussing here in the panel. Because if whatever we do related to climate change doesn't lead to growth, doesn't lead to jobs, doesn't lead to people having minimum standards of living, then this will not be politically sustained, and so it will not happen at all. So I would say that initiatives like the Clean Industrial Act from the European Union that followed the Draghi report are good outcomes, let's say, of this disruption, because are basically policy reactions to that disruption, acknowledging that sustainability goals, climate goals are core and should be kept, but they need to be coupled with an industrial strategy that goes hand in hand and that creates then jobs and promotes wages and so on. And what's interesting about the Draghi report and the assessment that is made there is that, of course, the predominance of China is there also on these clean technologies. And so what we need to do individually and as a group, in particular in the context of the European Union, where Portugal is precisely to see what are those industries and what are those areas in which we can invest in and in which we can be competitive. So main point, the opportunities are there. A lot of them are already being materialized, and I think it's important that we have this in mind, because sometimes also we have a tendency to think that this is not happening. It is happening. The data are very clear. Much more needs to be done, and that needs to be done first and foremost with direction from policymakers. So it's politicians that need to take these core decisions, and in the context of the European Union, this recognition that sustainability and industrial policy needs to go hand in hand is, in my view, a good outcome, let's say, of the current political situation.
Thank you very much, Anna. Just a minor point. I think what you said about the Draghi report is very important, and we should say that the Draghi also points to an opportunity for sustainability, because what is happening right now is to use the Draghi report to say that we should finance the industry of war. Of course, you know, then we can discuss about the priorities, but one of the potentials is also for sustainability. So thank you for bringing this case.
It has the three pillars, the Draghi report: innovation, defense, and energy and climate, so for sure.
Frank? How do you think?
Yeah, my view is sort of similar to Anna's. So in terms of opportunities, well, I think there's lots of opportunities, and it's in that sense a lot of positive things have happened in the last 5 to 10 years. So the first observation is that change is happening really fast in renewable electricity, for example. Since 2010, I just looked up the numbers. It's gone really quick. So in Europe, renewable electricity as a percentage of all electricity is now 35%. Almost doubled over the last 10 years, 31% in China, 22% in the US. So this is going really sort of quick. And electric vehicle sales has gone even quicker. That's quadrupled in 4 years, from 5%, this is global numbers, 5% of all car sales in 2020 to 22% of all car sales in 2024. And in China, it reached 48% last year. So China is just plowing ahead. In Germany, it's tailed off a little bit. So this is going really, really quick. And I think this is, you know, the International Energy Agency, with renewable electricity, said this is now unstoppable. These are literally the words they used, because the costs have come down by 60, 70% for solar and wind. And in most parts of the world, it's now just the cheapest option. So 90% of new additions of electricity are renewable. I mean, so this is even if we stop the policies, this is going to go ahead. We do need to reconfigure the grid. I'm not saying it's all easy, and in the UK, it's particularly also the pricing policies, because we still have a pricing mechanism which pays all electricity users the price of the last asset that came online, which is often the gas turbine. So the renewables have massive gains, but it means the electricity price is still high, so the benefits are going to the producers, not the consumers, despite the massive cost reduction is not passed on. So that's due to old regulations, and we need institutional change. I'm not saying all policies need to disappear and the grid needs to be reconfigured, but this is moving ahead really fast. And I think we do now have a template of change that works. It does mean this is quite technology focused, and increasingly focused on utility scale, because that's the cheapest option. So really big solar farms, really big. We still think solar is on people's rooftops, but that's really only a small part. It's like 10%, at least in the UK. It's a utility scale, so it leads to an acceleration. The amount of money is 2 trillion. I looked it up yesterday. 2 trillion has gone into, this is all, this is electric vehicles, industry, grids, renewables, 2 trillion. Which is getting close to the numbers that we need. You know, the estimates were we need 4 or 5 trillion extra per year. We're getting in that direction. But the drawback of the mobilization of big finance is that it becomes a certain type of transition pathway, which is very technology oriented, very large scale, in my view. So community energy and a whole range of others are sort of falling away by the wayside. So there's a positive, it's clearly accelerating. Money is flowing into those areas which are profitable, but it leads to a narrowing down of the transition pathway, in my view. So that's the trade-off. The second point is, I think there has been a change in priorities. Also in Europe, the Green Deal is no longer just driven by green, but also in the US. It's increasingly about geopolitics, security, growth, competitiveness, these kind of issues. Those are the top priorities in Brussels. It's no longer just about green so again, there's a trade-off there. It has led to a global innovation race. Now, this is new, relatively new. Well, not new for China. China has been playing a long game. They've been doing this since 2010. We have been quite late to wake up to this. You know, both in Europe, and you wonder, we do all these foresight exercises in Europe. No one saw this coming. It's quite surprising. The US also woke up, of course, did the Inflation Reduction Act, 369 billion, a transformative amount of money. Europe is trying to catch up. There's a global innovation race in these areas, which, you know, again, it's got some positives because you are now, as we know, climate ministries or environment ministries are not very powerful. This is, we know this from the environmental governance literature. But now what is involved is the finance ministry, the economics ministry, industry policy, sectoral policies, and now we get the powerful ministries involved, which is why there is a lot happening. So I think there's a change in the role of the state. Let's not forget, until 2020, it was all about neoliberalism and a little bit of tinkering on the margins, with the carbon price, and it was not very effective. So I think that's another shift. There'll be a real shift of the role of the state, much more supportive. In the US, of course, industrial policy is back on the agenda with a vengeance. Deployment policies, in China they've been doing this for a long time. So I think this is a positive, this is driving change. So there's a change of priorities, so the green and climate is less. But this was your first point. I mean, there is a change in priorities, but it's not all bad. If you are linking it to other priorities which are more important to many policymakers, well, you get more support, more money, more. So again, there's a balance and a trade-off. But I think something has clearly accelerated since 2020 in particular. And I think the last positive thing, I think, we see increasingly, I think, spillovers between all kinds of sectors and systems, and particularly electrification. It's becoming the main, sort of the dominant pathway, I think, for thinking about decarbonization. We first decarbonize electricity, and then we do electrify heating, we electrify transport, not just personal cars, but increasingly vans, buses, trucks, light trucks, heavy trucks, maybe airplanes longer term in the future. We can make green hydrogen, not quite yet, but maybe in 10, 15 years. Heavy industry, electric furnaces, electric boilers. So I think there's a whole spillover from cheap electricity to a range of other sectors, which, I think it's got even maybe green steel is coming on the agenda, either through hydrogen or electric arc furnaces. So I think all these sort of spillovers from the electricity sector is basically pulling a lot of the economy along with it. And I think this is, China, again, is way ahead already than the US and Europe in this dimension, but I think that is a positive development. Again, it's quite technology-oriented, I do admit that, but it's got some positive effects. It will have, driving the transition forward. I think that's a big opportunity as well.
Frank, I would add a case. An interesting case is that in China, in Beijing, you apparently never been, but my friends that went there said that the cars are electrified everywhere. Whereas if you compare what is happening in London, where since 1995 to now there are 2/3 less cars on the street. I think that's also some possibilities for the future. So Diana, about the opportunities, how can we mobilize the public sentiment instead of manipulating against the transition?
Thank you very much, Nuno. I think that's an excellent question, and I'm not sure if I'm the best to answer that, but anyway, let me reflect also on that and on the past really excellent interventions, and perhaps I will challenge some minor points just because we are in debate, and then it's interesting to not always agree on everything. But first of all, yes, I think this change is really, we should frame it as an opportunity, because I think we've been spoiled. In the last few decades, we've been just spoiled thinking that this is the most important thing on the planet, and we just need to educate these stupid people, and then finally when they understand this is the single most important thing, we'll be fine, and we'll just put all the investments there and so on, and we'll be done. And first, I think it's time to wake up that that's not how it's going to happen, and sit down and reflect what we have been doing wrong and how we could do better. And every crisis is a major opportunity for rebuilding. And in that, just small reflections, I very much agree, and it's great how Frank elaborated much better than I would have although I wouldn't do the left-right thing, because I think it has, climate change affects everybody, and I think whether you're left or right or fascist or anything, it affects us equally, and it has to be on the agendas of everyone. But the point is that I think one of the problems in the last decade exactly was that we have been just looking down on all these uneducated, stupid people whom we just need to educate. We find out the perfect technology, and we put a lot of research on technology acceptance. Already this is, to me, such a elitist framing is that we are the great engineers and we know what is best for them and we just need to force them to accept our wonderful thing. And perhaps we need to accept that that's not how it works, and we need to come down from a high position and rather really understand, as Frank said, what does everybody want and how we can relate to everybody, and just accept that not everybody wants to be educated, not everybody will think climate change or whatever, sustainability is most important, but what do they want? How can we relate to what we think is important to what they think is important? How can we merge the two? And until we can do that, we are not going to have a sustainability transition. If we just want it this way, that we just force everyone to be how we think. And the other thing is that I think we really should reflect, and we have been doing wrong. I think there is not literature yet on this, but I think that's really becoming clear over the last year, not only in the US, in the European Union, in many of our countries, that we've been framing the whole climate and sustainability issue as a cost, as a burden, as a as a regulation. We must get out of oil. It's a phase out. It's a reduction. Everything is. But that's it. And we are surprised. Oh, we have problems with competitiveness. Oh, we have problems with the people. Of course. I mean, who wants to live like that? That we are constantly, we have to reduce, we have to measure, we have to monitor, we have to, this is, of course we are turning people off if this is how and we have to pay a lot, and it's even more of our GDP and even more of our investments and everything, and we have to pay and responsibility and if we only frame it this way, we are just going to lose, and we have been losing. But I think this is the time and really good opportunity, perhaps still, to fundamentally change directions. And it's not different what we have to do, but I think how we talk about that. For example, this IEA report also is about investment needs, how we need to change investment. But in fact, why don't we talk about investment opportunities? Once I was in this amazing panel together with John Holden and really great minds of the world. It was also UN expert, the UN special panel on climate change, together with a very senior person from Swiss RE. And we have been doing the same, calculating the cost, investment needs, and so on. And he said, this is a great news. There is so much money in the world that just can't wait to find out what's the best investment. So, give us all what is coming, and so that we can. So I think just simply framing it, the whole transition as an opportunity, rather than working on what we have to reduce and put standards and prohibit things and ban things instead, and we have to do that, but instead focus on putting the alternative in place. And if you have a great alternative in place, it will be automatic that will come out of the old thing, and in this way, we have been talking with China, and China is the really excellent example how you can also do it. And I think unless we really stop and think much more about how China has really taken us over, and it's not only China, I see India as well. And it's a lot of what we have, these poor countries and whatever, and we are the great Europe. What I see, they're really taking us over, because exactly they have been able to foresee what's coming. And already 20 years ago, when electrification, when electric mobility, when solar energy, when wind energy were all like, the expensive thing, we have to look at, competitiveness, and we cannot invest in anything. They saw it then, and they put all the effort to grab this industry, to dominate the supply chains, to own the resources, and surprise, surprise, we are now all vulnerable to everything in China, because they saw this 20 years ago and they invested in it and they pushed it. I know they have a different political system and it's easier, so I'm not saying. What I'm simply saying is that we need more foresight in the opportunities. And if we are looking at opportunities, for example, last year, more than 11% of China's economy was related to green industries. In fact, 40% of all, they didn't have a huge growth, but they did have growth. 40% of all of their growth was related to the green industries. So if in Europe, instead of talking about how we are getting less competitive in some of our 20th or even sometimes 19th century industries, or oh my God, we have to save all those, every single job and all poor our car industry and so on. Instead, if we have also focused on really the future industries and put, I don't care how much subsidies or whatever, but really push all what we can to develop. We have all the brains still, but they are taking over because we have not been focusing on that, on the opportunities. I think we could go much faster in that way, and we wouldn't. But that means, yes, we may have to go up. We may have to let go of some industries. And I think that's exactly where we have been the victims of our own success. We think we are great in Europe, we have a great industrial structure, and we are really so much insisting of keeping the same structures. No, we may have to let go. Personally, I don't think it's such a big problem if the car industry will, because exactly what Nuno said, the future, especially in Europe, the future is not so much in the car. And that's what, but rail systems, on the other hand, are really struggling. Put much more of your money in the rail rather than all the cars. Or we are really what's happening in China, and we are not waking up to that, and the US is sooner, is the revolution with drones. Some cities in China, even lunch deliveries, are no longer on, on wheels. They're coming with drones, and it's cheaper than anything. Huge transition opportunity. It can totally reform agriculture because you don't need the heavy machinery to go on the soil and destroy it. We are not even talking about this, and that can completely transform mobility, agriculture, everything. So I think the problem is we just have to be much more disruptive. There are millions of opportunities, but we need to focus also on demand, and this is just my last point, if I may, because yes, electrification is tremendously important, and it's great success what we are seeing in electric mobility. But if you look at the real numbers, what share is electricity playing in mobility? And this was not even any of our scientific reports. I saw this in the Financial Times, really scary. We are still at 2 to 4% of all, despite all our amazing success in electric vehicle sales over decades of subsidies into this. We are still at 2 to 4% of all mobility is in electricity. And in fact, it's been constant. In Europe and North America, it's not increasing. In China, it's increasing really rapidly, but it's still single digit. So it means that even despite our amazing success in scaling up green electricity, unless we also focus on demand, our total demand, we are not going to succeed, because our hunger for more and more energy, even more electricity, is growing still faster than how much we can upscale clean electricity. And it's not going to come for free. We already realize the supply chain, the mining and so on issues, critical minerals, everything, there is no free energy. So unless we also focus how to do more with less, we cannot do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. We are going for the third and last round, and at the end of the round, I would be happy to take a few questions from the audience, but if you have questions, please make the question short in order to take a lot of them and still have a small debate here. So, Frank, I would ask you first for this third round, what principles should guide the transition pathways going forward?
So, I've got 3 principles that I think are important. I think the first is that we need to sort of reorient the financial subsidies to consumers, because so far it's been the rich people that have benefited from the subsidies on the first electric vehicles or the solar. They get subsidized to put them on the. So it's not like there's a huge unfairness in there. The subsidies have gone to the rich, which was fine for early movers, because you need to get started somewhere. These are the people that want it, But I think now we need to sort of, particularly if we want to address that 30–40% of people who are not so interested per se in climate change, but we need to make sure or help them reorient to electric cars or to heat pumps or insulator at 0 cost. Then it's attractive. It's not just give them a bit of subsidy and expect them to cough up the other half. I mean, they don't have that amount of money. So that's expensive, but it's also a way to create scale And it's a way to show to a lot of people at lower income levels that actually this transition is an opportunity, because it will lead to lower household bills, because these heat pumps, they're 3 to 5 times more efficient, so you need less energy to actually heat your home. So I think that's my first principle. We need to make it zero cost for people on low incomes to make the shift, because otherwise it's not going to happen, and you will keep feeding the populace like this is expensive and costly and all the negatives. So I think that's a massive shift. So not to the rich, but it needs to go to the poor. That's also a way to create scale. I think the second is we need to focus not so much on R&D, well, still also on R&D, because we need to develop the disruptive technologies, but a lot more on deployment. Because that's where the massive cost reductions have come. It's not come from learning in the lab, but it's by actually doing it that you got these increasing returns to adoption. It's what Brian Arthur calls it, learning by doing, learning by using, scale economies, network externalities, complementary innovations. That's partly why it was a surprise for most economists that the cost went down. Actually, when they started doing it, it wasn't really anticipated that the cost would drop by the number that it did. And I think that's a lesson that we should draw from the other technologies. We need to start deploying it, and then you build confidence. The cost of capital comes down, companies get more confident, they will invest more, policymakers may then gradually ratchet up policies. So that's another debate in the literature. Should you start with high targets and then push, in which case, of course, you get resistance? Or should you start with low targets, start deploying, build confidence, lower the cost, then gradually ratcheting up the targets? This is, I think, an ongoing debate in the political science literature, but we know if you start with high targets, you're going to get resistance. And there's a lot of evidence that if you start slow but then deploy, because then you trigger all these positive feedbacks. And then it's easier, you build coalitions for support, and it's easier to, in the next round of policymaker, to ratchet it up. So I think deployment, positive feedbacks, there's a whole literature now on tipping points, how you can get to those tipping points. I think that's an important, so we need to focus a lot more on deployment. That is going to cost money. We need to get over that hump, because in the beginning deployment is expensive. But the evidence so far suggests that when you get over that hump, cost can come down. I mean, again, that's an opportunity. And I think the third principle is, we do need to focus on competitiveness. Where, as Anna said, and we need to think a bit more cleverly, where actually does Europe, or wherever you are in the world, still stand a chance to compete against China, which is dominated, particularly in the commodity technologies. I'm not sure we can ever compete. In solar and wind, they are just so far ahead. I mean, I understand we need battery factories in Europe, partly to protect our industry, but those will be 50% more expensive, those batteries, than the ones from China, which then will delay the transition. So I think policymakers need to sort of navigate, and it's a dilemma. We don't want to import everything from China, because also security and supply chains, but it is cheaper from there. So how do we find those areas where actually we stand a chance to compete? And that's not easy. That depends on your country, on your capabilities, on your skills, on the industry that you have. But I think now it's a bit strategic autonomy and competitiveness. They're nice, big, grand words, also in the Draghi report, but how to implement them, I think the policymakers in Brussels and probably elsewhere are still struggling how to implement that. So I think we as a community can also maybe help in that. That's why I think we should have a more global perspective on these transitions and think where are countries and firms making the choices, and where can you actually viably compete? Because we know we need to compete, but even Draghi, I think, is a bit unclear where we do stand a chance and where not. So those are my 3 points. Reorient the financial subsidies, focus on deployment, and think more cleverly about competitiveness.
Thanks, Frank. Diana, why is equity not only a moral issue, but a strategic imperative?
Thank you, Nono. Yes, equity is definitely crucial, and I think that's probably one of the threats that globally what we see, that equity is not getting better, and we know, in fact, it's getting much worse, or at least inequality, but we see that actually all economies did much better when there was less inequality. But still, I think that's definitely also an opportunity, because as Frank already alluded to that in the end, it is the top 10% who emit more than half of our emissions. So if we don't frame it again as something that we want to constrain the top 10%, but we do focus our policies and frame it as opportunities for the top 10%, which, by the way, perhaps also reduces their emissions significantly because they have the resources, they have the capacity to influence also change. They also, because they spend fast, they have the opportunity to latch on to new trends and so on. So definitely, I think if we work much more on how to work with the top 10% or even top 1% in the sustainable transition. And this, I was disappointed that there is not so much literature on that. There is not so much knowledge on that. There is a lot of knowledge on, and there is so much more knowledge, on decent living standards and so on the bottom 50% and fairness and equity. But I think if we focused much more on also in the scientific part on the top 10% and not only naming and shaming, so not approaching it in that way, but rather, how can we engage them? How can we tap into that as opportunities? Also, just let me see. Yes, to come back also what Frank has said about what Europe can be competitive in. There are still some areas which we could. For example, energy efficient buildings. But I do see that actually China and India are starting to really push it strong. But it is our innovation. We have invented the passive house. We have invented and even legislated in many countries the energy positive buildings. We know how to build and retrofit buildings to need virtually absolutely no heating. So I don't think we need to electrify heating. I don't think we need to even have hydrogen, definitely not in the residential sector, because we can retrofit and fix all our buildings up to basically use no energy for heating, for cooling. We still need to, but if we use much less for cooling, we not only reduce emissions, but we save people's costs, we save urban heat, because a lot of the local heat is generated from just air conditioning. And since we invented this, and also because architecture is so different in the different countries, culturally, material-wise, and everything, I think we could get the edge on this. Also, more shift to bio-based construction materials, so get away from cement. We are so insisting on, protecting our cement industry. Do we really need so much cement industry already in the 21st century in Europe? I don't think we need a lot more new infrastructure, a lot more new buildings. Well, to some extent because of the immigration. But otherwise, our population is decreasing. In some countries, also, we already have a lot of the living space. We don't necessarily need to increase more of living space. So, but what we have, rather, repurpose it, redefine it, make it more livable, make it more chic, use it better. So I think if we focus on the solutions, which really can be done mostly locally, we focus more on the bio-based, nature-based solutions. If we, on energy efficiency, how to keep demand down. This is what we have been excelling in, and North America as well. I think we could definitely lead in these areas. Let me see if I had any other points. Yes, I think that the crucial thing is that also more opportunities in the cities. As I think I really liked, again, Nuno, your example on the electric vehicle versus urban. Yes, we are leading there. We have the most livable cities in the world. And it's no accident, but we are not making any effort at making a profit from this. Exporting that model. It's not an accident that every year after year after year, in the most livable cities index, a majority are European cities. And it is because they are walkable, because they have good public transport, because they have lots of green, because they are inclusive, and there are many things. I think if we focus more on, okay, so embrace this. How can we have not only just single technological innovations? Innovations can be systemic. We need to move away focusing on single technologies and focusing on holistic innovations. systemic innovations, IT, AI-based innovations on apps. How can we make more ride-sharing and shared mobility? The best study ever on shared mobility is on the city of Lisbon, and it's such an amazing study from the International Transport Forum, which is an OECD's transport branch, showing that if we supplied all of Lisbon's mobility needs door to door with the existing vehicle stock, so you're not thinking about anything big or any big investment or anything, just rethinking mobility. So door to door, we could just use 3% of the present vehicle stock. For everybody, mobility would half, at least half, or be even less. We could give up 99.5% of all the parking places we have, and turn that into parks or social space, or even more, perhaps housing if we need more housing space. So there is such an amazing opportunity, but we have been not innovative enough. We're too locked in our 20th century urban mobility systems. We really need disruptive thinking, how to transform the fixed lines, fixed timetable type of 20th century mobility system into 21st century AI-based, demand-based, and more more demand-based, and not your own. Nobody necessarily, or few people really want to own a car. What they want to have is guaranteed mobility if they want to get to somewhere. If you do get, so just how to transition this to such mobility visions. I think Europe could still be ahead if we focused in such disruptive systemic solutions, which are not about big investments necessarily, but using your mind and be disruptive. Thank you.
Very much. I think I agree, but Anna, how do we ensure resilience and credibility in the climate and economic policy?
Well, I think that to ensure resilience, we need to follow a pathway that is both economically competitive and just equitable. And this is what have been just said by Frank and Diane in their interventions. Allow me to basically add 3 principles to the 3 principles that Frank mentioned, and that I think that actually complement well what Frank just said. So I think that one of those principles need to be the economic rationale. I'm insisting on this because it will not happen if the economic rationale is not there. There's no way to counter that. And we have been seeing, and this was said as well, that the cost of these clean technologies has been declining very fast. So we are now getting to know how to do the transition also in a cost-effective way. Then, and because I'm an economist by training and by practice as well, we need carbon pricing. There's no way to go around it. And there, I think that the progress is quite impressive. So in the 2000s, less than 1% of emissions were covered by some type of carbon pricing, and this has been increasing steadily. So I was looking at the numbers. In 2010, it was already around 5%, in 2020, around 50%, and nowadays it is around 30%. So carbon pricing is progressively being included in the prices we pay as consumers as well, and there the European Union is at the forefront with the ETS and so on. So the economic rationale and the economic incentives need to be aligned. But this alone will not do it, and Diane insisted on this point several times, and correctly so. We also need what I would call social acceptance. And there were interventions here about the cost of disinformation, the backlash that creates. I think that the mayors of London and Paris recently published an op-ed in The Guardian, precisely calling for further action against climate disinformation, because that is taking a toll on what policymakers can do also at local level, because the change needs to happen at local level. And there, well, how to tackle that? You need action by tech firms, you need action by governments, you need supranational action, and there's no way to go around it. But on top of this information, social acceptance comes from people seeing the clear benefits of the transition. And there, let me give you a very concrete example. So here in Portugal, we have what is called a renewable energy community. What is that? Basically, I can give you a concrete example. In Oporto, there is a neighborhood, an area called Esprella, where there was the development of this energy community. So the public buildings, rooftops, were used to install solar panels, so to produce clean energy in areas that are already artificialized, so rooftops that are there, available from the municipality, public buildings, and that energy was shared with a neighborhood called Agra do Amial that houses people that have socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And so because of that clean energy that is now being produced, their energy bills were cut in half. This is not a favor that we are doing to these families. So this is also the energy transition happening, producing clean energy and at the same time ensuring that that also brings benefit to people and direct benefits. This is what we need to do as well. So if we talk only about carbon taxes and carbon pricing, of course people will react. But there are plenty of benefits there to be grasped, and they are very material. So they are our monthly energy bill, for instance. So these are two areas that need to go hand in hand: the economic rationale and the social acceptance. Then the third principle, and the final one that I would convey, is that, well, we need to ask ourselves, each of us individually, what we can do and do it. Because we focus a lot on what is not being done, and of course we should be vocal about it, but we have the responsibilities, well, in our lives, but also within our institutions. And so in the case of Bank of Portugal, we do have a strategy for sustainability, so we are looking at, well, decarbonizing our own operations, but more important than that, we are understanding how climate change and how climate risk affects our own mission. And, well, the Portuguese Central Bank has two main missions: price stability and financial stability. And on both of those paths, climate risks do have an impact, because if you think about increased floods, increased wildfires, increased droughts, well, price stability will be affected, and so there's surely a role for central banks. But also, we do know that if we keep the focus on ensuring price stability, the uncertainty will be reduced, at least from that front. So it's also our core responsibility in the given the prospects of the huge investments that are needed in the future, to ensure that we reduce uncertainty to the minimum, well, with the tools and with the mandate that we have, in that case, price stability, because we are talking about very long-term investments where uncertainty about price developments and about inflation can be very important. And then on financial stability, so as you can imagine, climate risks also affect the banking sector. We have been looking carefully into that. We have been working with the banks so that we are sure that they are incorporating these climate risks in their own strategies. And why? Because we do need a robust banking sector, because investment is so desperately needed in these areas. And so my final point is that it is also for each and every one of us to see how can we adapt what we do and how can we contribute, how can we do our share. It's not easier because, as you can imagine, central banks were not used to have people from climate sciences or to work with climate sciences, engineers and so on. So this was all new, but this is a path that we are doing at the Portuguese Central Bank, but also globally. There is a network for greening the financial system that brings together central banks and other financial supervisors that are working together on climate issues.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I'm glad that you brought the IUL example. I know that this is a social neighborhood. I live there. In the worst times. So now I would suggest that we go for 10 minutes. I know that we will dent 4 minutes of your break, of a coffee break, but if you want to go for the coffee break, you can go. We are going to collect one round of questions, so please make the question short, give your name, your institution, question, and then you can also say to whom in the panel you address the question. Okay, there's going to be two microphones, one in this side, another in the other side. And yeah, please. You have one question there.
Shall I start? Okay. Antonella Maiello, Leiden University, and my question goes to the three panelists. Thank you very much for your...
Coming from some place. Where is the person?
Here. Thank you very much for your input. So my question is, I heard many times words innovation, technologies, costs, and economy. Actually, I heard a lot about that. So my question is, how do you think to change this without, what is the place here of our relation with the ecosystems and nature? What is the place of education? And do these investments are going also in this direction? How are we going to change the system if we focus still a lot on economy and competitiveness, and we are not talking about degrowth at all?
To all of us.
To the three of them.
Hello, does it work? Yes. Okay, so my name is Agata Stasik from Warsaw in Poland, Koźmińska University. Two short questions. First is, how do you think is the recent focus on defense in public spending and public attention, does it give any chance to look for some synergies between the goals of sustainable transitions and defense spendings, which is kind of obligatory for most of the NATO countries in the coming years? And the second question is about the quality of jobs in industry, which seems to be as important as the very fact that these jobs exist for public acceptance and, let's say, dealing with some tensions, and how it relates to this focus on competitiveness. Do you see any problem here or how it can be solved? Thanks.
Hello, I'm Ronan Bolton from the University of Edinburgh. So one change, going back to your initial question, over the last few years has been, I guess, a more positive view about nuclear power, particularly amongst, say, tech investors in the US and so on. So nuclear for Europe obviously ticks some boxes in terms of security, industrial strategy, climate, but there's obvious trade-offs, which is the theme of the conference. So I'd like to get the panelists, each panelist's view on how they see the role of nuclear in Europe's energy future.
A comment and a question. Lucas Torsch from Roskilde University. First, thank you very much for pointing out that we need to also adjust our framing when we speak to other people outside of the sustainability bubble, because, right, there is a lot of co-benefits of sustainability, and you can connect with people who actually don't care about sustainability at all, and you have common targets. So thank you very much for pointing it out. And I actually also think that China is not necessarily always a threat to Europe, but actually, right, in the sustainability agenda, they're actually a big ally of Europe, right? They're pushing for climate negotiations and so on and so forth. So also there's common ground, not only rivalry, and rivalry is also good for competition, right? And a question, you talked about carbon pricing. I totally agree with you, and I actually also think we need to move beyond carbon pricing to also pricing other externalities. I wonder what your take is about, what you maybe know from the political discussions or scientific discussions globally, what's happening there, what is the next thing that people are trying to price. And I know there's controversies about pricing, but I agree, carbon pricing was the only thing that has been successful in absolute decoupling so far in some jurisdictions where the price is high enough.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, thank you for these very interesting questions. I will answer from the perspective of the central bank. And so, for instance, on the nuclear question, I will leave it to my colleagues because, well, from the point of view of the central bank, we are agnostic in terms of choice of technologies. There was a very interesting question on the idea of climate change, climate risks, but then also the nature dimension, biodiversity, ecosystems, and so on. And let me tell you that in the context of the network for greening the financial system, so this global network of central banks and financial supervisors looking at this topic, we did start with climate risks, and we did start with the incorporation of that into our mandate. That was the starting point. Also because, in a way, I can say it is easier in the sense that we do have the metrics, we do have the knowledge, the collective knowledge to incorporate it, but nature is now ranking also high in the agenda and is a top priority for the ongoing work. So what we are doing as central banks is looking at these nature-related risks and building measures and building ways of evaluating them, because there's the only way we have as central banks to incorporate it into what we are doing. So we are working closely with the academia, we are working closely also with the civil society to make sure that we build metrics so that we can also take into account nature, ecosystem degradation, biodiversity losses, and the like. So this ranks high in the agenda. On the defense and sustainability and how can we, if there are synergies or points of contact, I would say that, Nuno, you mentioned the Draghi report and the fact that it indeed focuses on those areas simultaneously. And so our societies want many things, and gladly so. And so we cannot have a single goal, and we know that that's not possible and not desirable, probably. So we have different goals playing out at the same time. And what I would say that the Draghi report basically just organized the obvious, no? But that's not really new knowledge in the sense that I think that we could all agree that something needed to change. And what it does in that report and this team is basically to notice that we need to do something differently about defense. We need to think differently about climate change and sustainability, also with an industrial perspective, and we need to think about ways to foster innovation in a way that we are not left behind in the global scene. All of those three things can go hand in hand, also if we have appropriate financing mechanisms, and in the context of the European Union, moving forward with what is called the investment and savings union is very important to make sure that we can unlock the capital needs that are needed for all those different areas. And I would say that indeed it's not a matter of choice. We cannot choose one or the other. We need to pursue them all. And there are ways that we can do it and that also creates quality jobs. I think that Draghi report precisely departs from the idea of the European social model and then goes on to elaborate on the industrial strategy that would go hand in hand with that social model and that would also sustain that social model going forward.
Yes, thank you. Really excellent question. So because of the lack of time, let me just focus on a couple of points. First, I think the really important thing in the elephant in the room is growth. And I wouldn't necessarily say degrowth, but it... Thank you. So, but at least post-growth. And it's quite interesting that if you are talking, there's lots of scientific debates, even sustainability, climate change, everything. It's very interesting that it always seems that one thing that we almost all agree on, that simply we cannot fix this if we keep continuing to expect the same level of economic growth forever. So that just doesn't work. But at the same time, we don't have sufficient science yet to really tackle that. So I think we need much more work on that. And in here is a little point of advertisement. We published, I think, really excellent review paper on post-growth in the Lancet Planetary Health. And so I just want to recommend that because in that we put together all the different scientific disciplines that work on this. But I think we do need to tackle this more. Of course, degrowth itself is a taboo, so we shouldn't discuss degrowth, but at least thinking about how we can create better economies and better living, more well-being, without necessarily more increase in stuff, increase in ownership of stuff, so increase in consumption. And in that sense, the issue of focusing more on the demand or sufficiency goes hand in hand with thinking about that. And in fact, that also is very much connected to, you talked about quality of jobs. In fact, if you really ask young people, I don't see, there are quite a few young people here, but not all that many, what kind of job they want. Most of them want to be YouTubers, right? Or most of them want to just sit at home and want to make, or not at home, but be in some wonderful place in Bali or something and be on their iPhones and make a lot of money from that. That's very far from having a manufacturing job and being on the, so it's the concept changing. Also, Europe here, what we see, a lot of young people don't want to work the usual 5 days a week, 9 to 5 type of jobs. So I think we are not keeping in pace with all this enormous shift also on, and what AI is creating. So the whole, what a quality job is a totally different concept now, and we should also keep up with that. And I think there are a lot of opportunities in sustainability because, shortening the work week, but giving people a better work-life balance is, and that's where we can, where also China comes in, because the one reason why they are so competitive, they are extremely competitive, but they are not working even 9 to 5. They're still working 9 to 9, and not only 5 days a week, but 5, 6, or 7 days a week, even if not officially, but unofficially. And also, I think cost-wise, their salaries are very fast catching up with ours, so it's not going to, I don't think the cost will be a long time the advantage. So that's also about competitiveness. I think we can perhaps be more competitive if we more focus also on these social goals, which are very much connected to what people really want. What the new generations really want is not necessarily, the number in GDP growth, but simply living better, and that's very much on work-life balance and what actually I'm doing. So just final point on nuclear, that's a very, very important question, very difficult question. What we see, at least I just want to come from scenarios. There is a role in nuclear in most of the scenarios, but it's never like the big thing, but it's almost never also disappears. But the issue is that simply now that's the most expensive power we can imagine, we can produce. Of course, still it has an important niche because that's stable power, whereas renewables, we do see the challenge with intermittency and unpredictability, so we need backup. But I think with more and more tools and more AI and sector coupling coming up, more and more electric mobility and more better coupling with mobility and more demand response, more AI in that, it's also going to be hopefully less need for that. But certainly there is a role, but none of the models see the dominating role for that.
Thanks, Diana. Frank, you have the honor to conclude the session.
Okay, I'll be really brief. The question on ecosystems was very good. I think we are a bit at risk of, as a community to just become the climate change community. And I actually think biodiversity, more generally than ecosystems, is a major threat, big problem where I don't see a lot of advance or solutions. And 95% of the papers on this conference are about climate change. We're supposed to be the sustainability transitions conference, so a whole range of issues, but it's increasingly be focused on climate, which of course is important, but I think biodiversity for me, and we probably need to broaden our portfolio of research and take biodiversity as a problem, which in some ways is bigger, and I don't see a lot of improvement, whereas I do see some improvement in the climate area. With regard to pricing, I do think there is a role for pricing as an instrument, but the evidence suggests it's mostly driven efficiency innovations, which have been important in reducing emissions, but they've played almost no role in driving transitions. None of the transitions that we're talking about have been driven by carbon pricing, so it's part of the portfolio, but I would not put all my eggs on the carbon pricing instrument. And nuclear. The West is really bad in building nuclear at a cost-efficient scale. Each time we see massive cost overruns in all Western countries. So in the West, I'd say, don't build new nuclear. Keep the ones that you have, keep them open. Other parts of the world seem to be a lot better in actually building them fast and within cost schedules. As you know, Ronan, in the UK, we built them 10 years later than they built, and 3 times as expensive as initially budgeted. So we seem to have lost the skill to do it. So I agree with Diane there. That's it.
So thanks Frank, thanks Diana, thanks Anna. Apologies to everyone because we have started 15 minutes late. We are ending 10 minutes late. I would like to make just one announcement. So you will have here new information about the schedule of today, the sessions, and you also have information about the tour circuits of the afternoon. And this is really a unique conference because we start talking about tensions and conflicts in the morning, and we will end up tonight at the Titanic-sur-Mer. So thank you very much.